Come on. I've always been fond of animals, which is a good thing, since it's impossible to avoid them here in Sri Lanka. Over the years, I've had many animal companions, usually dogs, but also a pair of mischievous monkeys who did their best to take over my life. All my pets have been lovable, but some have also surprised me with their intelligence and their ability to know what I'm thinking. But what can we make of claims that some animals have extraordinary, even supernatural skills? These include mathematical horses, dogs that can diagnose illnesses, and domestic pets with the navigational know-how to track down their owners over miles of unfamiliar countryside.
Bonita Whitfield owes her life to her dog Boo. She believes Boo alerted doctors to a disease that threatened her life. Now Boo has a place in medical history. Her extraordinary story is chronicled in a world-famous doctor's journal. Bonita Whitfield has lived to tell the tale.
Well, I used to be standing at the sink, and she'd come up behind me and start sniffing my leg. And I used to shoo her away because I thought, you know, it was just a dog sniffing. And this went on for about 4 or 5 months. And then one day I was at the sink washing up and I felt something on the back of my leg and put my hand down, not realising it was Boo. And I felt a little lump on the back of my leg. That evening when I had a bath, I had a look at it, and it was a mole. I've never had a mole there before. And then one day I was out in the summer and she actually went for the back of my leg where this mole was and tried to nip it off. And she did again, try to bite it off. She's not a dog that snaps or bites, and it was just so out of character. But it still really didn't dawn on me that there was anything wrong.
But Bonita told a friend about the mole. Her friend, a nurse, told her to see a doctor at once.
She said, promise me you will go to the doctors. So I went to the doctors, and he sent me along to King's College, and they inspected it, they took it off, they did a biopsy on it and found that it was melanoma. Dr. Hywell Williams, who was treating me at King's, said that another year and it would have started to spread in the body. So I was very lucky, but I still didn't put the two together, the dog and the melanoma.
Dr. Hywell Williams was carrying out a survey of patients with melanoma skin cancers.
When I came to Mrs. Whitfield's notes, I noticed that somebody had put a comment, "Dog sniffed at mole," in exclamation marks. And I had a laugh of it at the time, but I thought, well, hang on, there may be something in this. And I rang up Mrs. Whitfield, and indeed the dog had sniffed the mole, not just once, but on repeated occasions, whilst ignoring other moles, just this particular one.
And I said to the doctor at the time, they must give off some type of an odour, because my dog could smell it, or I thought she could smell it. It wasn't until I sort of thought about it, I thought she must have known it was really bad as well.
I think that this particular dog was instrumental in saving Mrs. Whitfield's life, in that she had the type of skin cancer, the melanoma skin cancer, removed at an early and curable stage.
Boo was awarded a gold medal for her diagnostic skills, and the doctors hope that the rewards to medicine may be even greater.
I think Mrs. Whitfield's story taught me to be open-minded as a scientist to the potential diagnostic powers of so-called lower animals. And I think compared to our sense of smell, a dog's sense of smell is infinitely more powerful, and they may well have beneficial actions for medicine in the future.
In Lorenzo Abundi's Californian home, his 2 Rottweilers have pride of place. Lorenzo believes he owes his life to one of them. Her name is Cinder.
Hi, Cinder. Hi, Reno. Ready to go for a walk? Come on. Okay, let's go bye-bye. Let's go. Come on. Okay, little girl, you ready?
From their early morning call through wash and brush up, this dog's master cannot do enough for his best friend.
Nice and pretty.
Lorenzo, a firefighter, likes to hike high up in the Californian mountains. Only there can he escape the stresses of his job.
And on this particular day, my wife was sitting at home in bed. She couldn't go on the hike with us, so I just took Cinder and Reno myself to go hiking.
Hey guys, let's go. Cinder, Reno, come on.
Normally when we hike, Cinder likes to be the leader. She stays ahead of us, and she likes to mark her territory before Reno.
Come on, Cinder, kennel. Cinder, kennel.
And on this particular day, she acted real strange, and what I mean is that she started turning around, going back down the trail, and I kept calling her, trying to bring her on. Come on, let's go, let's go. So I wasn't in the hike about a half hour, and I decided to cut it short and go back home because I was thinking she was sick. She never acted that way before. As soon as I turned around and started heading back down the trail, she immediately became the leader. She wanted me to get back down to the car and go back home. So Cinder's looking at me with this glazed look in her eye, and I didn't want to take any chances with her because I love her so much, so I decided to go ahead and call the vet. So as soon as I got up, I felt this palpitation, like in my neck, and I felt it on my pulse, an irregular pulse. It really started to scare me. So then I got up to go get the phone, and immediately I felt like something just grabbed my lungs with all their might, and just like two hands just squeezing at everything. Next thing I know, I'd fall to the ground. And Cinder's nudging me with her nose on my hand. I could feel the phone there, and I was very weak, and I was able to dial 911 with my thumb. I couldn't even bring it to my ear, and I remember the operator had answered. I could hear it, and I said I was a firefighter, and I feel I'm having a heart attack. Please send somebody immediately.
We received a 911 call to Lorenzo's house. When we got there, we found Lorenzo lying on his back on the floor of his living room. We found that his blood pressure was 270 over 130. He was in great danger of having a massive heart attack, and I think he was on his way to that when we got there.
If I would have continued up on that hike on the hill, which is normally about 3.5, 4 hours, I wouldn't be here today, because if that incident would have happened up there in the high altitude, I would have died up there on that trail and there would have been nobody around.
Lorenzo's a pretty lucky guy. If we hadn't got there when he did, he probably would have died, and I think he owes that all to his dogs.
I think dogs in general have a special sense. They can hear your heartbeat 20 feet away. They have the ability that we just need to take time to listen to our animals. Cinder has the ability to know the rhythm of my heart. She probably can sense or smell the adrenaline in my body. The body chemistry was changing, and she knew I was going to go down. She knew that if I was going to go down, that I was going to need help. So she decided to try and get me to go back down and go back to the car and go back home where I can get help. And I think she's learned that by the telephone there can be human contact, so that's why she brought me the telephone.
Animals, apparently as clever as humans, have amused and amazed scientists and onlookers for centuries. Some, or rather their owners, have made fortunes showing off their incredible talents. Porky pundits packed the playhouses of 18th century Europe. Their pet subjects, mathematics, mind reading and spelling. Toby, the sapient pig, played cards, guessed the age of the audience and even told the time. Even more erudite animals followed in the 20th century. Mathematical dogs like Chris the Rhode Island mongrel performed calculations worthy of a computer. In Germany, Wilhelm von Osten claimed he could train horses like clever Hans to tap out the answers to complicated sums. Academics came from far afield to investigate these strange and controversial powers. Later, an American horse, Lady Wonder, was said to have learned secretarial skills. She typed words on a giant keyboard.
I don't think we should take such stories too seriously. The scientists who've investigated these mathematical and mind-reading horses and dogs dismiss them as brilliant circus acts, where the trickery involved was too subtle for all but the most vigilant to detect. For example, it's virtually certain that clever hands learn to respond to tiny gestures or sounds made by his owner, who gave him all the answers. But there are other examples of animal powers that can't be dismissed so easily.
Today, Blake the sheepdog shows little sign of the incredible journey he once made across eastern Britain. His skills at driving hundreds of sheep into pens and fields pale by comparison with his navigational talent. The dog's odyssey began when his owner had parked his truck and trailer with Blake inside. When Tony Balderston returned only minutes later, thieves had struck.
I was gone for about 20-25 minutes, and when I come back, I just couldn't believe my eyes. The Land Rover and trailer, the dogs, and everything had disappeared.
The thieves decided to dump the trailer. It was found empty in a car park at Downham Market, a town far from Blake's home. It was here, a long way from the pastures he knew, in the heart of a strange town, that Blake's incredible journey began. The distance between Downham Market, where Blake was dumped, and his home near Holt is about 50 miles as the crow flies. But to complicate matters, Blake took a roundabout route.
Blake wasn't seen till the next morning. The sun was going through Swaffham and see him, but Blake being a bit of a loner, the sun couldn't catch him, and I thought he was coming directly home. Instead, he went round by Little Fransham Way, where I sometimes run some sheep.
Tony put the word out among Norfolk's farmers, and Blake was spotted by Jenny Mallum.
I saw Blake the day after having received a telephone call from Tony Balderston. But unbeknown to me, the dog I saw didn't really connect, and he was, in fact, walking along the very, very busy A47 early one morning. Blake was looking very, very sad with his tail down, and I wished I'd known at the time that it was him, but it just did not connect.
By now, Tony had contacted the local radio station. He asked listeners to be on the lookout.
When I got phone calls from people, because I went to where I had the call from and then tried to take my bearings, think which way he was coming home. But he always took a different road than I did.
Every time Tony tried to predict Blake's route, the dog would turn up somewhere else.
And after he got to Geist, we had phone calls at every little village. People phoned up and seen him go past. But every time I went out to look for him, I was about 20 minutes behind him. And eventually he made his way back to where the sheep are down at Leatheringset, and that's where he picked them up from.
They were reunited at Leatheringset, where Tony had once kept some sheep. Blake had decided to look there for Tony. He'd been gone 5 days and travelled more than 60 miles to the village next to his home.
When he got back, he was thin and dirty and really weak. His paws were roughed up, he was limping. And he looked at me, you know, for a few seconds before he came up to me. I think he thought he's got to get wrong for being away so long.
Scientists suggest Blake may have navigated by linking together the places across the county where Tony Balderston had grazed his sheep. By going from pasture to pasture, he'd found his way home in stages.
Stan?
2 or 3 years ago, Tony Balderston used to graze his sheep here in the winter. And one can only presume that where the thieves dropped him off, he suddenly realised that he probably knew the area and actually came back to the ground that he knew several years ago.
Hatherley Market in Devon is one of the west of England's busiest cattle markets. Here, cows, calves and bulls are traded between farmers. But this was the starting point for one of the strangest stories in the annals of animal navigation. It was here that Blackie, a heifer, and her calf came to auction. The calf was bought by this man, farmer Arthur Sleeman, and its mother, Blackie, went to this man, Bob Woolacott. Both men set off for their farms with their new purchases. In Bob's cowshed, Blackie, the mother, seemed far from happy.
When I bought her home, I mean, she was wild. She'd been taken away from her calf. We did the best we could for her. We put her in the yard and bedded her down, give her hay and water and some meal. And when we came down the next morning, the cow was gone.
Early that morning, a cow had been spotted loose in a village. The postman wasn't the only person to have seen her trotting along the road.
2 of my neighbours saw this cow and it was going our way. It had a market ticket on it, but it wasn't their cow or anything. And it came right down to our place.
Arthur Sleeman woke up to discover a strange cow in his yard. His farm is more than 7 miles from Bob Woolacott's.
This cow wanted to go in with the calf. We let it in there with its calf, and it immediately, the calf went and suckled it.
Fortunately, the strange cow still carried the auction lot number on her back. Sleeman was able to call the market and find out who owned the mystery cow. The market confirmed it was Blackie, the mother of the calf he had bought. Bob Woolacott drove across to claim her.
When I saw the cow and calf together, I knew there was no good bringing the cow back on its own because it would all happen again. We bartered a bit and one thing and another, and eventually I came home with the cow and the calf.
But how had Blackie found her way to a place she'd never seen, over roads she'd never travelled?
I think she could hear the calf calling, and that's what took her in that direction. That's the only thing I can think. Some people say that in the middle of the night, when everything is still, that she might have heard, the cries coming up through the valley, but I mean, it's a long way.
Never seen anything like it before, and never will again, I don't expect.
Being a sentimental sort of man, I thought it's better to bring them back and let them go on together, and that's what we did.
After Blackie's maternal marathon, Bob decided they'd never be parted again. Cow and calf spent the rest of their lives together on his farm. When Beetle the cat escaped from his owner's new apartment in the heart of London, Robin Lefevre was distraught. The cat had only been there for 6 months and had never been out of doors.
We put up notices everywhere, hoping that people would spot him, and it was dreadful that he didn't come back, and we really didn't expect to see him again at all.
With Beetle at large, Robin Lefevre was deeply concerned. The animal was adrift in the capital. All he'd known before coming to the city was the quiet countryside around the family's cottage near Canterbury, 70 miles away. Months passed, and Lefevre thought he'd never see Beetle again, until one day that he'll never forget.
Well, I was at work, and I got a call from my parents to say that they had some incredible news, and that our neighbours had found Beetle. He'd turned up in their woodshed. I was absolutely amazed. It was several months later. And when we brought him home again, he was completely familiar in his surroundings and back in his usual spots.
Back home in Kent, the cat didn't even look thin. The family thought that somehow Beetle had been charming a few free lunches along the way. But the real mystery was how on earth this cat could have found his way. His route must have taken him across Europe's busiest streets, through menacing traffic, and all of it along an unknown route.
To get back here, the incredible thing is that he would have come from North Kensington, and he'd have to go right the way across London, across the Thames, right the way through South London, right the way down past Medway, that probably went across it, and he'd then have to have travelled right the way through Kent, right down to here, past Canterbury. I can't explain how he did it at all. He's got a brother from the same litter who was brought to a coastal town near here, and that was some 30 miles away, and he walked straight back here again as well. And so I can only imagine that there's something particular to this area, or maybe to that particular litter of cats, that they're just sort of homing cats.
Claims that animals can navigate enormous distances present problems for scientists. It's so difficult to check all the facts that even experts can be fooled.
In Washington, D.C., Dr. Michael Fox is one of America's best-known veterinary surgeons. He writes in newspapers across the country, and he also travels the world representing the United States in international animal welfare. His credentials and know-how in animal matters are impeccable, which makes it all the harder to understand how he was caught up in a classic case of mistaken identity.
We were living in Galesburg, Illinois, in a small apartment, and decided to move into the countryside. It was about 6 miles away, a little cottage on the edge of some farmland. And Igor was a young male Siamese, and we took Igor along with us. But after a few days, he disappeared. We searched all over the fields and around the ponds and the woodlot and so on, calling his name. We went out at night with a flashlight, hoping to find him hunting or something. And he had a very loud voice, you know, but no Igor. It was probably after a couple of weeks, I'd say. First of all, we heard a meowing and a scratching noise, and there was this Siamese cat looking at us through the kitchen window. And I said, good Lord, it's Igor come back. He was skinny, emaciated. So we opened the door, and this cat walked in as though he'd lived there forever. And we thought, well, that's it.
But 6 weeks later came a dramatic and confusing development.
We had a call from neighbors saying that there is a Siamese cat in terrible condition wandering around where you used to live. Perhaps you ought to come over and have a look at this animal, because we did hear that your Siamese cat had disappeared. Well, of course, we simply couldn't believe this, that what we were doing. We had whom we thought was Igor II here. This couldn't be Igor. And it's an impossible journey. Back into town, we were living in a rural area. Igor had never made that journey on foot, and he certainly couldn't have seen much when we drove out to the country place, because we were piled with boxes and everything else, and he was in a small cat cage, more or less on the floor of the car. But we were both shocked when we saw this cat. It was Igor.
But if this was the real Igor, how had he found his way back to the Fox's original home? Michael Fox believes animals can somehow tune in to the minds of humans.
My interpretation is that the animals are tuned into an emotional realm that I call the empathosphere. They're able to, through empathy, sense where their loved ones are. It's like the loved ones are an emotional antenna, and the animal can home in on it. It's part of the great mystery of which we are a relatively insignificant part. And I like to think that our animals can keep us in touch with this mystery, with an aspect of the sacred and the unknown.
Momus Duty. These stories certainly make me wonder. Although mistaken identity can never be ruled out, the sheer volume of cases where animals seem to have found their way home over great distances suggests that we have much to learn about their powers. If we could understand what's really going on when dogs apparently diagnose illness, perhaps a whole new branch of medicine could be opened up. And I'll certainly never again think of my own non-human companions as dumb